All right. Welcome to the Working Man's Kollel. We're continuing in Masechet Shabbos, the Mishnayos of Shabbos. We are in the ninth chapter, starting the ninth chapter. But the ninth chapter, we've encountered this in Masechet Shabbos in the past. The ninth chapter is really picking up on the heels of the eighth chapter and going to be discussing many of the same principles that we've discussed in the past. So I'm only going to be spending one class on the ninth chapter, and I'm actually going to be picking out a topic from the ninth chapter that does not have to do with carrying on Shabbos, because we've already discussed it in depth. I encourage everyone, though, that on Mondays, when you guys get together as a group, to go through each and every Mishnah, just so that at the end we know that we covered every single thing. But when we have the formal class, I'm going to be discussing one topic. But before we begin, I just want to thank our sponsors for the shiur, sponsored by Charles and Janet Jaffe. To thank Rabbi and Shashi Wogelanter for 33 years of their leadership, their care, their love, and their Torah. We, of course, thank them deeply, and wouldn't be having this shiur right now if it wasn't for all their efforts. And it's also sponsored by the Lotzoff families in memory of Cyril Lotzoff, whose yurtzeit was this past week. His neshama should have an aliyah. One of the themes we discussed in Mishnayos in general, in learning Mishnayos, where Mishnah that was put down by Rabbi HaKadosh in the 3rd century in order to save our oral tradition, was put down with the trepidation of the fact that we might lose the oral tradition from the Jewish people. Although, we have a written Torah and then an oral explanation or oral laws that are not found in the written Torah, but at the risk of, God forbid, losing those oral traditions, so Rabbi took it upon himself to write it down. But he still wanted to keep the Sinai experience of that oral transmission from one to another, that there needs to be. It's not just a text that you learn or that you memorize or that you attain a certain amount of knowledge from, but you really engage in a process. You engage in the process of understanding the depths of the Torah. And in order to accomplish that, what he did is that he would write down some of the laws that are found in our oral tradition in a very what would seem like strange type of a way. He would purposely make mistakes. He would purposely flip opinions, things of that nature. And the Tiferes Yisrael, one of the commentaries on the Mishnayos, in his introduction explains because Rebbe did that in order so that one can't just simply read the Mishnah, but one needed to learn the Mishnah, needed to work through what the Mishnah said. And through that, you're able to hold on to the oral transmission, that same experience that the oral law is supposed to engender without actually losing any of the laws themselves. So another example of that is found in the 9th chapter, where the 9th chapter goes on to continue discussing the laws of carrying, but the first few Mishnayos actually have nothing to do with Shabbos at all. Nothing to do with Shabbos at all. So what are they doing in Masechet Shabbos? So you'll notice that the Mishnah over here is going to use a very strange type of derivation system to get to a certain law, where generally speaking, if I were to ask you, well, how do I know that I have to take the 4 species on Sukkot? So you would tell me, oh, well, it says in the pasuk, b'yom harishon, l'kachtem lechem b'yom harishon, that on the first day we have to take for ourselves the 4 species. Okay, that's a straight pasuk in the Torah. However, there are some psukim in the Torah which only hint to certain laws, but don't say them explicitly. So our Mishnah, the way the 8th chapter ended was using a verse to explain a certain law that was a very vague verse. So then the Mishnah now in the 9th chapter for these first few Mishnayos picks up showing more examples of that same type of a strange way to learn a halacha by using a vague pasuk to learn a law even though it's non-conclusive. So that's where our Mishnah picks up over here. And the Mishnah discusses, like I said, something completely unrelated to Shabbos. The Mishnah says, so this is the second Mishnah in the 9th chapter. Minayin la'aruga, that from where do we know that a garden, shehi shisha al shisha tfachim, that is 6 by 6 tfachim, which is about between 3 and 4 inches. It's definitely more than 3 inches, probably not as much as 4 inches, somewhere in between. But how do we know that if you have a garden, a patch of garden that is 6 by 6 tfachim, she zorim betocha chamisha zronin dalid al dalid ruchos ha'aruga ve'achas be'emza. How do we know that you are able to plant inside of this patch, this 6 tfachim by 6 tfachim? So it's 24 inches, we'll say, by 24 inches. How do we know that in that type of that size patch of land, you're able to plant 5 different species, 4 on each side of the patch, and then 1 in the center? So you have a patch that goes like this, right? So you have 4 by 4. You have 4. You have 4 sides. So you have one type of grain that you could plant over here. So you plant grapes over here, then barley over here, then tomatoes over here, and then avocado over here, and then in the middle you can plant wheat or corn. How do we know that you could do that in such a small area? Because the pasuk says in Yeshaya, ki ka'aretz totzet tzmacha ukenegda zru'eha tatzmiach. So zra'a le'ne'amar ela zru'eha. So it uses basically 4 different types of language to talk about the different types of agricultural growth, but then it puts the word zru'eha in plural, indicating more than one. So basically 3 plus 2 equals 5. You have over here in one patch of land 5 types of things that are growing. Now, we have to take obviously a big leap, a huge leap back. What is this mission even talking about? What's the context over here? That it's prohibited to plant different types of grain together. What would even be the potential issue going on over here? So the Mishnah is working off of the prohibition in the Torah that's found in Parshas Kedoshim. Take a look over here. The Torah says in Parshas Kedoshim. Can you see this? The Torah says, "Sadecha le'tizra kelayim," that one is not allowed to plant in a field 2 different types of seed. Kelayim, a mixture. You're not allowed to have a mixture of different grains. So if one has a field that they're planting both wheat and they have a vineyard for grapes, so that's a problem if they're all intertwined and connected. They need to be separated by a certain amount. So our Mishnah is giving us the minimum size that they need to be separated by. Basically, they need to have at least a tefach and a half on each side. So you have 3 tefachim separating each grain. That's enough of a separation that you would need in order to plant multiple types of grain, which is why in an area that is 6 by 6, all you would need, then you could have potentially 5 different grades. Fine. This prohibition of having different types of grains, planting different types of grains, is, as the Torah told us right here, it's a prohibition to do the planting. Sadcha lo tizra kilayim. You're not allowed to plant. But the Gemara tells us that there is an additional prohibition, that it's not only a prohibition to plant the kilayim, but there's also a prohibition of keeping, of retaining this mixture in your field. Let's say someone made a mistake. Okay, it's a simple mistake that someone makes the mistake of they planted their wheat and their grapes too close together. They miscalculated. Okay, or let's say in our case, our Mishnah talked about a case where you have 5 different grains in this small area. Let's say you had 6 types of grains in this small area, which by definition means one of them is too close to another. So what do? Do you just say, what's done is done? You just leave it. So the Gemara tells us no, that part of the prohibition of do not plant is do not retain, do not keep it. This is a prohibition from the Torah. The Gemara tells us, though, that if one were to, let's say, keep their kalayim in their field, keep their mixed produce growing in their field, it's a prohibition, not just a prohibition, but a prohibition that you would get lashes for. You would get punished for such a thing. You'd be brought to Beis Din, and Beis Din would whack you for such a thing. They dish out lashes for having violated the prohibition of the Torah, not just of planting the kilayim in your field, but actually retaining it, keeping it in your field. So now we have to get to a question, which is a major question. And this is not just a question that's related to kilayim, not just related to, this specific type of an agricultural issue. This is a Shas question. A Shas question is a type of question we would discuss Thursday night at Torah and Cholent during Shas survey, which is a type of a question that will present itself not just with regard to this isolated issue, but this is a question that has tentacles spread all throughout Shas, that comes straight from this discussion of kilayim. We just said that the Gemara tells us that if someone were to keep kilayim, they were to keep this mixture in their field, so they would get lashes for such a thing. That is a problem. The Gemara tells us right over here, it's in a few places. It's a Gemara in Sanhedrin, in Makos. It's a Gemara in a few places. The Gemara tells us that it has a discussion. Why is it that one does not get lashes for the prohibition of nosar? Nosar is that there's a commandment from the Torah, in Parshas Bo, and also in Parshas Vayikra, that let's say I bring a carbon to the Beis HaMikdash, and I have to eat it in a certain amount of time. Okay, so let's say the carbon Pesach, I need to eat by the next morning of the the 15th of Nisan. That by the time morning comes, according to some opinions, I need to eat it by Chatzos. But regardless, I need to make sure that I eat the carbon Pesach before a certain amount of time. Okay, it has passed. All right, before sunrise, we'll just make it easy. All right. What if I don't? So I violated a prohibition in the Torah. Lo sosir mimenu ad boker. I'm not allowed to have leftovers from my carbonos. I need to make sure I eat it all. And if I have leftovers, I violated a prohibition in the Torah. Titania, the Brisa teaches us, lo sosir mimenu ad boker. One is not allowed to have any leftovers in the morning. V'hanosir mimenu ad boker. So let's say someone does have leftovers. So then what are they supposed to do? So the Torah tells us, ba'esh tisrofu. You have to burn it. Okay? You're not allowed to eat it. At this point, you have to burn it. Okay? If someone has leftovers from their carbon. So the Gemara over here now discusses that how do I know that I don't get lashes for such a prohibition? Meaning, I got full. I was eating my carbon Pesach and I got full. I just couldn't take another bite. I'm definitely going to be violating this prohibition, right? Morning comes. Unfortunately, I have these leftovers. So I have to say vidoy, I have to say alchet, it's a mitzvah from the Torah that it all needed to be eaten. I was not allowed to have any leftovers. I have the leftovers. However, Beis Din cannot harm me in any sort of way with a physical punishment. They cannot give me lashes for such a thing. Why? So there's two opinions in the Gemara. Ba hakosov, litain aseh achar lo saseh. So this is the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda, that the reason why I'm not going to get lashes is because there's a positive commandment to make up for the negative commandment that I violated. Lomar she'ein lokin alav. This is to tell me that I won't get lashes for it. Basically, that since I have a positive commandment to burn it in the morning, to burn the leftovers in the morning, that is why I won't get punished for having violated the prohibition of having the leftovers in the first place. Thou shalt not have leftovers, no punishment, because thou shalt burn it in the morning. That's the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. Divrei Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Akiva Omer, Rabbi Akiva says, Lo min hashem huzeh. No, absolutely not. This is not the reason you will not get lashes. Meaning, don't tell me, Rabbi Yehuda, that you're off the hook simply because there's another mitzvah you're going to do. Okay, great. There's another mitzvah you're going to do, but that's not the reason you're going to get off the hook. Ella mishum dahavilei lav she'ein bo ma'aseh. Rather, because this is a passive prohibition. Any passive prohibition does not have lashes associated with it. You can't get punished. You can't get whacked in this world for violating a Torah commandment unless you actively violated a Torah commandment. But if all you did was sit back, and by sitting back, by your inaction, you violated a Torah commandment, you do not get punished physically in this world for doing so. The way that Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz, who was the Gadol Ador in the early part of the 18th century, is unbelievable. Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz. Rabbi Yonasan Eibshitz explains. He says because it's essentially like when if you were to, at least maybe not today, but go back 30 years ago. You raise your hand to your father. What's going to happen? Your father's going to raise his hand to you, right? Maybe not 30 years ago. Go back 40 years ago. You raise your hand to your father. What is he going to do? He's going to raise his hand back to you. Basically, when you take physical action against God by actively violating his Torah, so then that's like smacking God across the face. So therefore you get smacked back. But if all I did was sit back and through my inaction, my laziness, I made a mistake, there's no slap associated. You didn't raise a hand against God. Therefore, there's going to be no hand that's raised back to you. This is the opinion of Rabbi Akiva, that when it comes to a lav she'ein bo maisa, ein lokan alav. A lav she'ein bo maisa, ein lokan alav. Okay. So therefore, when it comes to nosar, when it comes to having leftovers, they're passive. Therefore, no lashes. Fine. So the question we have to ask ourselves, and by the way, the Gemara makes it clear that we paskin like Rabbi Akiva. We paskin that lav she'ein bo maisa, ein lokan alav. By the way, we also paskin like Rabbi Yehuda about lav shenituk la'aseh. Just with regards to nosar, it's exclusively Rabbi Akiva. Fine. So if that's the case, so when it comes to retaining kilayim in my field, remember, I have a field, I have grapes, and I have wheat growing together. They're too close. What am I supposed to do? If I leave it, I'm going to be violating a Torah prohibition, so I have to get rid of it. But let's say I decide to leave it. So that's inaction. But what did we just say before? You get lashes for such a thing. The Gemara tells us, Rabbi Akiva himself tells us, in the Gemara at the end of Maseches Makos, on Daf Chaf Aleph, that if someone were to leave their kilayim in their field, they were to retain it, they get lashes for such a thing. Isn't that being passive? You shouldn't have planted it in the first place, but now I have a separate prohibition of keeping it there. So if that's the case, why am I going to get lashes for that?
Well,
That
maybe
was
it's
completely
because
passive, no action at all, no action associated.
maybe it's the original action of
Oh,
planning in
so,
its first place.
so that's what I would have thought also, except the
Okay.
Gemara makes it clear that those are two separate prohibitions.
Okay.
So yes, you're right. If it would have been that I'm going to get lashes for my original action, great. But that's not the case. I'm getting lashes specifically for having kept it. It's like there's another prohibition here. Potentially, I'd be getting two sets of lashes, one for actually planting it, and another one if I ended up keeping it. So what's going on over here? I'm being passive, and yet I'm getting lashes. So Tosfos, right over here, asked this question. I'm not that smart. Tosfos is the one that asked this question, not me. Tosfos asked the following: Vikoshe, Daha Rabbi Akiva Amar, because Rabbi Akiva says later on Daf Chaf Aleph, Hamikayim Kelayim Bekerem, that if someone were to keep along, retain their Kelayim, which is what we're talking about, in their field, Loka, you'd get lashes for such a thing. So our Mishnah, if you were to plant 6 species in your small little patch, you'd get lashes for such a thing. 5 species, you're still good. You plant 6 species, you'll get lashes, and for keeping it, you'll get lashes. So hold on. How's that possible? I thought we say that if you did a passive prohibition, you're not going to get lashes. Uperish ba'aruch, so the aruch, which is a very, very, very early Rishon, 10th century, very, very early commentator. He's not even a commentary. The aruch is a dictionary, the Sefer HaAruch. He's a dictionary of Talmudic sayings and Talmudic principles that he'll define principles to kind of like a handbook as you're learning. You can reference his book to know what does this mean in this context, or and the Aruch will explain that. It's one of the first, if not the first, Talmudic dictionary. Uperish ba'aruch, the Aruch explains, Dahainu shemaniach oso besof sadeim. The Aruch explains that he doesn't really deal with this question. All he says is that you had this the patch with the multiple types of grain in it. You had the kilayim, you had this mixture planted in your field. Ukshematza zerua, and you found it planted. Dehave lav she'en bo maisa. That's a lav she'en bo maisa. And regardless, you get lashes for such a thing. Lakach nira. Therefore, Tosfos answers, and he says, "Da'amekayim kalayim bekarem." That what does it mean? How could one violate this prohibition of keeping it in your field? Hainu sha'asa geder saviv haklaim. It must be you had to do some sort of action. You weren't completely passive. The only scenario Tosfos can dream up where you'd get lashes for such a thing would be if you built some sort of a fence. You built a mechanism to make sure that the kalayim would stay there. So if you built a fence around your field, so there, that's being active in keeping it. It's not being passive anymore, but you actively kept it in your field. You took action to make sure that the kalayim would stay there, which is why you're going to get lashes for it. That's what Tosfos says. But Tosfos skirted the issue. Tosfos basically said our premise is wrong, and this is something we discuss often, which is that whenever a Rishon asks a question, really whenever anyone asks a question, there's always a premise to your question, and then the answer either destroys the premise or keeps the premise. So if I were to ask Scott, based on looking at his background, I'd say, oh, when did you go to Amsterdam? So, and he responds to me and he says, I have never been to Amsterdam before. So Scott destroyed the premise of my question. The premise of my question is that he's been there before. So when a Rishon asks us a question, it's important for us to recognize what's the premise and what's the conclusion. Did the conclusion destroy the premise? Here, Tosfos destroyed the premise. The premise is that you're going to get lashes even though you were passive. Tosfos says, no, premise is wrong. Here you did take action. Because it's impossible to get lashes in this world unless you took action against God. Like Rabbi Yonasan Ibshit said, you slap, you get a slap back. The problem, though, is with the Aruch, the Heilige Aruch, the dictionary. The Aruch explained the concept of Mekayim Kalayim, of retaining the Kalayim in your field, by simply saying, you left it there. He didn't talk about a fence. He talked about nothing. And he said, you're going to get lashes even though Lav She'ein Bo Maisa, even though you didn't have any action associated, still you're getting lashes. How could that be? He's going against a basic principle in Shas. Why is it you're not going to get lashes over here? So in order to fully appreciate the answer we're going to present from Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer. Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer, the Rav in Slutsk. He was the Rosh Yeshiva of the Eitz Chaim Yeshiva in Yerushalayim. He passed away, I think, in the late 50s or early 60s. Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer was one of the foremost students of Reb Chaim Soloveitchik in Volozhin. Rav Isser Zalman Meltzer was unbelievable. He was an unbelievable Ohev Yisrael. He was an unbelievable Rosh Yeshiva. And the relationship that he shared with his wife was something that was legendary. They were like a model of Shalom Bayis, of just the most beautiful marriage, him and Rebbetzin Meltzer, that in fact, we have a beautiful set of Svarim that were published by Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer in his lifetime called the Even HaAzel. In the Even HaAzel, it's kind of like, it's his analyses on the Talmud, basically based on the Rambam. It's unbelievable. He touches pretty much on every major sugya in Shas, every major topic found in Shas. Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer will have an essay about it, an analysis, a thesis, amazing. Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer had terrible handwriting. But when you look at his Kisvei Yad, when you look at his manuscripts, not the typesetted published ones, but when you look at his manuscripts, which are easy to find online, when you look at his manuscripts, it's written in the most beautiful handwriting and the most flowery Hebrew. It's so easy on the eyes to read. It's better than reading the written typeset. And it's because his wife wrote the entire Even HaAzel for him. He would dictate it to her, and she wrote the whole thing. And he accredits it to his wife. The Even HaAzel is accredited to Rebbetzin Meltzer. Unbelievable. So before we get to his answer, we need to give a little bit of background to fully appreciate it, of the way he's going to explain the Aruch. So take a look at this Rambam over here. Oh no, how do I get rid of this? Okay, there we go. Okay, so remember, we said before that there's a machlokes between Rabbi Akiva and Rabbi Yehuda about why is it that one does not get lashes for keeping leftovers of their sacrifice. You had to eat it in a certain amount of time, but you remissed and did not eat the sacrifice by morning, let's say. You violated a Torah prohibition of having leftovers. And the Rambam tells us right over here, Aser lahotir mibasar hakachin. One is not allowed to have any nosar, no leftovers at all from kachim. La'achar zman achilasan, after the time allotted to eat them has passed. Shene'amar bekarban toda, as the pasuk says by the karban toda, lo tosiru mimenu ad boker. You're not allowed to leave it over until the morning. V'uadin l'shar hakachim kulam. This applies to all karbanos. Any karban that one was supposed to eat, they have to eat in the allotted amount of time. Past that time, you violated a Torah prohibition. Remember, we said, though, that there's a machlokas between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Akiva, why it is that you do not get lashes for having violated this Torah prohibition. According to Rabbi Yehuda, it's because there's a positive commandment that comes right after. that once morning comes and you did violate the prohibition, now the Torah tells you, go burn it. However, Rabbi Akiva says, no, that's not the reason why. Lo menashin huzeh. Rather, the reason you don't get lashes is because it's passive. You passively had leftovers, and therefore you don't get lashes for doing a passive prohibition. V'hamoser eino loka, says the Rambam, you don't get lashes. Shahare nitko hakosov le'eseh, because there's a positive commandment you're going to be doing next. As the Torah says, Shenamar v'hanoser menu haboker be'esh tisrofu. There's an obligation to burn it. Hold on one second. The Rambam is poskening over here like Rabbi Yehuda. The Gemara in Makos makes it very clear, though, that we posken like Rabbi Akiva, that the reason you don't get lashes for having leftovers is because of the fact that you were passive, not because there's another commandment you're going to fulfill. You're going to fulfill the positive commandment of burning it. That is true, you will, but that's not the reason you're off the hook. The reason you're off the hook is because you were passive. So then why is it that the Rambam is bringing down the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda? He's citing the reason of it's because there's a positive commandment you're going to fulfill next, of burning it. Why didn't he cite the opinion of Rabbi Akiva? And to make the question stronger, the Rambam himself poskins that we don't get lashes for being passive. The kol lav she'ein bo ma'isa. Any lav that does not have an action associated, says the Rambam, ein lokin alav. You do not get lashes for such a thing. So if that's the case, why is it that the Rambam quoted Rabbi Yehuda when he could have easily quoted Rabbi Akiva that the reason you don't get lashes for keeping your leftovers is because of lav she'ein bo ma'isa, because you were passive? So the Maggid Mishnah, who is one of the earliest defenders of the Rambam, I think the Maggid Mishnah, although he writes like an Achron, he writes in the same fashion as a later commentator, but from a biographical standpoint, he was still living in the ages of the Rishonim. He was a very early commentator, lived in the 1400s, but was a defender of the Rambam, which was rare in those days. So those were still the days of people attacking the Rambam. And then Rabbi Yosef Karo kind of was the one that made it popular to defend the Rambam. But the Maggid Mishnah was really the first to come out with a book in defense of the Rambam's opinions. And he deals with this issue, and he says that the Rambam is working off of a principle of how to understand lav she'ein bo ma'isa. That it's not a blanket rule that one will not get lashes if you did a passive prohibition. Meaning, we said before from Rabbi Yonash and Eibshitz that the only reason we get lashes in this world for violating Torah commandments is because we rose our hand against God. We took physical action, and therefore physical action it's a consequence back onto us. However, if someone was passive, okay, so you're not going to get lashes. Says the Maggid Mishnah, according to the Rambam, according to Maimonides, not true. That there could be times where even if you were passive, you'll get lashes. Okay, so how am I supposed to know? He says that the Rambam's principle is that if there was potential to violate this prohibition with action, even if you were passive, you're still going to get lashes. Basically, that there are three types of prohibition. There are types of prohibitions that are exclusively violated through action. An example would be eating non-kosher. There's no way to passively eat non-kosher. You're eating it. That's active. There are some prohibitions that are exclusively passive, like lo tachmod, do not be jealous. Where the Rambam says that is a lav she'ein bo ma'isa, there's no action associated. That's a feeling of chamadas halev, a feeling of jealousy in your heart, no action associated whatsoever. Therefore, you'll never get lashes for that prohibition. But then there are a number of prohibitions that fall somewhere in the middle, where you have more than one avenue of how to violate this prohibition. I could either do it actively or passively. Says the Rambam, according to the Magen Mishnah, that even when I take the passive route, I'm still going to get lashes for that. Why? Because I had the potential to violate it actively. And he points to a Rambam that tells us this basically explicitly. The Rambam tells us regarding the prohibition of not allowing your animal to graze your field while it's working. The prohibition of muzzling your working animals in the field. You have an ox working in your wheat field. They should have the right to eat as much wheat as they want. You cannot stop them from doing that. Says the Rambam, Kol hamonea habehema meleachol b'shas melachta loke. That anyone who prevents their animal from eating while it's working violates a Torah commandment and gets lashes for doing such a thing. Shne'emar, as the Torah says, Lo tachsom shor b'disho. The Torah tells us in Parshas Ki Teitze that there is a prohibition of muzzling your ox while it's working in the field. So, this prohibition can be done in a variety of different ways. I could physically muzzle the animal, or I could yell at the animal if I see it's about to eat something and say, "Don't eat it," right? Like a dog, right? You train a dog, where a dog is going to chew on something you don't want it to chew on. So you say, a Spike, stop it. And the Spike will stop it. He won't eat it. So potentially, maybe you could train your ox the same way. Maybe it won't be as simple or as smooth, but there's potential where you could say, hey, stop it, don't eat it, and the ox will stop. And the Rambam says, afilu chasma. According to the Rambam says that afilu chasma b'kol loke, even if you muzzle it, quote unquote, by using your voice, by saying, do not eat that, you still are going to get lashes. Hold on. By using my voice, I didn't physically do anything. And the Gemara says that it would be called inaction. Simply using one's voice, that we deem that as inaction. So if that's the case, why am I going to get lashes for yelling at Spike the ox to not eat from the corn? So the Rambam is telling us, though, that you do get lashes. Why? Says the Magen Mishnah, because the Rambam holds that if there are two avenues to violate a Torah prohibition, either with action or inaction, you are going to get lashes for that prohibition, even if you do it without action, because there was potential to violate it with action. Now let's go back to nosar, leftovers. The Torah says I'm not allowed to have leftovers. And that is, according to Rabbi Akiva, alav she'ein bo ma'isa. Okay? No action associated if I have the leftovers. Right? I was passive. The Rambam, though, told us that the reason you're not going to get lashes is because, no, it's nitak la'aseh, because there's a positive commandment you're going to do later that you're going to burn it. Why didn't he give why didn't he quote the position of Rabbi Akiva? Because according to Rambam, leftovers is that type of a prohibition that you have two ways of violating it. Either passively, of having the leftovers, or actively, by making sure you have the leftovers. What do I mean by making sure you have the leftovers? So I could either have leftovers by simply not eating it, right? There's another way to ensure I have leftovers in the morning. How? By taking it and throw it into the sea. I throw it into a lock. I throw it into a safe. I lock the safe and I throw the keys into the ocean. What's going to happen? I just guaranteed that I am going to have leftovers. Wasn't that
Go on.
violating the prohibition of having leftovers with action?
But okay, this is the saw, right?
This is what?
The leftovers are basar.
Yeah.
Right? It's meat.
Oh, sorry. Yeah.
You may have a bone. So you may never ever, it may be that you never ever get to eat everything off the bone. So you're always going to have leftovers no matter how much you try. So you ate to eat as much as you could, but there's always that little bit you can't get out, some marrow. So you have to, regardless of the best ever play.
It's a very good question. This is discussed extensively in the Gemara in Zvachim. It's discussed extensively, but we don't have the bandwidth to be able to get into that discussion. But take it, all else considered equal, there's a potential where, so we'll assume that there is a way where you can't have leftovers. Let's just assume that. Okay. And you don't have leftovers. You do have leftovers. You violated the Torah prohibition. And now the Rambam would tell you that if not for the fact that there is a positive commandment you're going to fulfill, you would get lashes. Why? Because there's a way to violate that prohibition with action by taking it and throw it into the river. That's what the Magen Mishnah says. That's how the Magen Mishnah answers this issue with the Rambam about Nosar. Comes along Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer and now explains that this is how we can answer the question that Tosfos was asking about keeping the Zrayim in your field. Tosfos asked, he said, hold on one second, why is it that you're going to get lashes for keeping the kilayim, by keeping the mixture of grain in your field? You, not like our Mishnah said, only planted 5 grains, but rather you planted 6 grains in this small area. And now, not only did you violate the prohibition of planting it, but keeping it, there's a prohibition. And Rabbi Kiva says you're going to get lashes for it. Hold on one second. Passively keeping it there is a passive prohibition. That's a lav she'ein bo ma'isa. And the Aruch just said you left it there. So Tosa says, oh, no, it must be you built a fence. So says Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer, no fence required. You don't need to do anything to get lashes for violating this prohibition. Why? Because there's a potential to violate this prohibition with action by building a fence. But you don't need to actually do it to get the lashes. You just need to have the potential to do it. And if there is 2 ways of violating this prohibition, both with action and inaction, then even if you take the route of inaction, you still are going to get lashes. Rabbi Isser Zalman Meltzer says, based on the Magen Mishnah's understanding of the Rambam, applying it to the Aruch. Now, I just want to end with 2 more minutes. I want to end with a major question that everyone asks on the Magen Mishnah's principle. Again, the principle is that, according to the Rambam, in order to get off the hook for the punishment associated with the prohibition, it needs to be exclusively a prohibition that has no action associated with it whatsoever, no potential action. It needs to be like lo sachmod, we said, which is completely based on your heart. That in your heart, you feel a sense of jealousy. There, no punishment at all. It's violated a Torah prohibition? Yes. Are you going to get punished? No, because there's no action at all associated with it. As opposed to these prohibitions we're describing now, nosar and keeping the kilayim in your field. There, even though you were passive or you yelled at your animal to not eat for the grain, there you were being passive, and yet you still are going to get lashes because there was at least the potential to do it with action. And in that scenario, you still would get lashes for such a thing. Everyone, though, has a major difficulty with this principle of the Magen Mishnah, based on a Rambam with regards to chametz. There's a prohibition in the Torah of owning chametz, not just eating chametz, but even owning chametz. The Torah says that there's a prohibition of bal yira'eh ubal yimatzeh. It says the Rambam, "Eino loka mishum lo yira'eh v'lo yimatzeh." One does not get lashes for violating the Torah prohibition of Bal Yira u Bal Yematzeh, of owning chametz. Why? Because that's passive, right? I just I kept it along, right? I never nullified it. I was passive. So you don't get lashes such a thing. Ela imkain, unless kana chametz bepesach o chimtzo, kedei shiyase bo ma'aseh. The Rambam says, however, there is a time where you would get lashes for Bal Yira Bal Yematzeh. When would that be? If on Pesach itself, you went and bought chametz, you went to the store and bought a box of noodles. There, you would get lashes for violating Bal Yira Bal Yematzeh. Hold on one second. Everyone wonders. Here, the Rambam is laying out for us that there are two avenues to violate the prohibition of Bal Yira Bal Yematzeh. Either by simply not getting rid of your chametz, keeping it in your house, retaining ownership over it, or actively going and buying chametz. And the Rambam says that if you take the passive approach, you will not get lashes, but if you take the active approach, you will get lashes. How's that possible? You should be getting lashes, according to the Magen Mishnah, even for taking the passive approach, because there's potential to actively violate the prohibition. It's a major question. There are a number of very good essays that try to answer this question in the Rambam. There's a great essay that is from Rabbi Soloveitchik to try and answer this question in the Rambam. There's a great essay by Chacham Medini, the Stei Chemed, a very early 20th century Sephardic Chacham who wrote an encyclopedia on the principles found in Shas, that also has a major essay to try and answer this question on the Magen Mishnah. But I'll leave it for you guys to think it over, and just some kiddush food for thought. Okay, we will stop here. Yasher Koach, everybody.
Thank you.